We begin with the conflict between Jews and blacks in America. The tension in the United States has been growing more and more over the last few years. From events like the Crown Heights riots to the dissension over issues like affirmative action and Zionism and black separatism, the two groups have found themselves at odds. Cornel West is the author of Race Matters. Michael Lerner is the founder and editor of Tikkun magazine. They met over a period of 6 years with a tape recorder between them to try to get to the heart of the divisive and volatile issues that separate blacks and Jews in our country. The results of their conversations appear in this book, Jews and Blacks, Let the Healing Begin. I am pleased to have them here to talk about what they discovered in their dialogue. Welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Always good to
friend.
be here.
How did this begin? I mean, whose idea was this, Cornel, to say, we need to talk? And out of that dialogue may come some idea or
I'd say
ideas.
very much Michael Lerner's idea. He invited me, based on advice of the late, great Michael Harrington, actually, to come and speak at a conference, 1989, I think it was. And from there, we became good friends and decided that if we were going to focus on social misery in America and try to transform the situation, transform it into a more egalitarian distribution of wealth and power and resources, that we had to highlight two groups that have served as solid pillars for progressive politics in America, namely Jewish Americans and African Americans. And so the dialogue began 6 years ago, and here's the result.
And the tape recording began 6 years ago? Or really?
Absolutely.
And I remember one night you and I were having dinner. Is that right?
That's
and
right.
Somewhere on the west side, and you said, I got to go up because we're going to tape part
we
of
were out
this
running right
ongoing
back
debate
to another
with
dialogue with Brother Lerner. You're absolutely right.
What did you learn about African Americans that you didn't know? What was it that Cornel helped you understand about who he is and where he comes from and what color means?
Well, I'll tell you one incident that happened between us that's reported earlier in the book here. And that is, I was growing up in an inner city in Newark, and there was a lot of tension between blacks and Jews. And I was always very scared in my junior high school, my first year in junior high, to go to school because there were these black kids who were kept on coming up to you and saying, got a nickel? And if you didn't have it, you got slugged. And in the book, I was telling Cornel that, and Cornel said, hey, I was that guy. And then Cornel told that he had been into that for a certain amount of time in his life until he had gotten into the church. And through the church and Jesus, his understanding of Jesus, he had really had a transformative experience and gone in a very different direction. Now, for me, at that point in my life, I was hoping, like when I was that kid, I was hoping that those kids who were attacking me could just be locked up for life. And I never had the vision of the possibility of change. And when I got to know Cornel West, one of the most principled and intelligent and loving people I've ever met, and for him to say to me, I was that guy, really brought home to me at a very deep level the kinds of transformations that are possible, number one, and number two, the limited ways in which people view each other through a particular form of behavior that might be offensive, but to not see the full human being behind that behavior and what may have been going on to lead to it and what might lead to its transformation. So when I heard that from Cornel, that was an incredible moment for me. I've learned a lot of other things in the course of these dialogues, but to really get that human beings are not fixed, and that even when there are moments of anger or things that you don't like, that you shouldn't like, that are morally incorrect, that person, that there's a human being there who embodies the Spirit of God and who can be transformed because the Spirit of God is that transformative energy in the world. I got it through this encounter and made a deep and profound impact.
And I think this personal dimension is very important, even as we talk about various structures of domination and various operations of power in our economy and the nation state, that we're living at a time in which we're seeing the proliferation of vicious put-down, lack of respect, relative paucity of fair-mindedness, and to have a relationship, a companionship, and a friendship that not only cuts across racial lines, but within our communities as well as across our communities, is a way of trying to sustain some sense of hope at a moment in which it seems as if the cynicism and the fatalism and pessimism is overwhelming. And so how do you hold that at arm's length, as it were? Most people, of course, are going to go with the grain because it's fashionable to do so. But I think what we try to do in this text is not simply talk seriously about the levels of unemployment and underemployment, very important, the inadequate health care, the unavailable child care, and so forth, but also to talk about relations that are very important, trying to highlight values of integrity and character.
Let me talk about some of the two important ideas, I think. One is that much has always been made within the black community, and especially within the Jewish community, of the role that the Jewish community played in the civil rights movement, that they, members of the Jewish community, a progressive community that supported the civil rights community as much as any group did. Is that all that it's supposed to be, or is there, I mean, did you go into this? Did you talk about this, and what came out of that?
Sure, no, we've got a whole
chapter. Well, I mean, I think that from our standpoint, there has to be, I think both of us came to agree that the Jewish role was significant. And Jews certainly have a right to be proud of their participation. And there are people in the black world who say, "Oh, well, it was just self-interest." And I think that we both came to understand that if that's self-interest, we would like to see more of that kind of self-interest, namely the self-interest of people saying, my long-term self-interest is in creating a just society and a caring society and a loving society. That kind of long-term self-interest is counterposed to the kind of short-term self-interest in which people just go just for themselves and their most narrow material interests. So there definitely was this alliance, but there was also a problem with this alliance, and I learned this about, I don't think I really understood it full well until I heard it from Cornel, the degree to which this very a way of talking about the experience made people in the black world feel condescended to, made them feel that we were claiming that we were superior to them, that we had a higher level of knowledge, that we were coming to teach black people something. And I don't think I ever fully got that in the deep way that I got it when I spoke to Cornel, and that some of the feelings, the hurt feelings that Jews had at the point in which we felt we were being pushed out of some elements of the civil rights movement after 1966-67, when black power became a major force. I don't think I understood it then. I felt it was irrational then, and now I have a much more deep understanding of how black people could have seen us in that way. And conversely, in the Jewish world today, you have an awful lot of people using that pushing away that blacks did as the excuse. Just like they use anti-Semitism in the black world, something that I have absolutely no sympathy with and will not tolerate. But nevertheless, they use that anti-Semitism in the black world as their excuse to fit into American society and abandon Jewish values, the Jewish values of caring, of justice, of love thy neighbor, of love the stranger. And they're using, there's a section of conservative Jews who want to, politically conservative Jews, who want to use that reality of anti-Semitism amongst the small sector of blacks as the excuse for saying, let's give up on all this social justice orientation. Let's forget about our alliance with liberal and progressive causes. Let's take care of our own narrow self-interest, which means less taxes, less social programs, and to hell with the poor.
Farrakhan.
Well, Minister Louis Farrakhan, very complex, complicated person.
Felt by many Jews to be anti-Semitic.
Felt by many Jews to be deeply anti-Semitic. Certainly statements that he's made have been unwarranted, anti-Semitic in terms of losing sight of the humanity of Jews. One of the reasons why I'm deeply committed to dialogue with Minister Louis Farrakhan is because I do believe that the influence that he has must be read in two ways. On the one hand, he's got a deep commitment to the black people and has a deep love for black people expressed in his own way. And therefore, one highlights certain contributions that he's made in terms of turning people around, the values of black self-development, self-reliance. On the other hand, he comes out of a tradition which itself has linked black suffering to Jewish power in a way that I think needs to be radically called into question. And it's at that particular point where my critique is put forward. But one has to understand, on the one hand, that Minister Louis Farrakhan has significant influence, especially among young black people, and therefore we're involved in a struggle for the hearts and minds and souls of young black people. And on the other hand, one was recognize the contribution that he's also made. And here where we have deep disagreements in terms of whether, in fact, I should be in dialogue with Ms. Louis Farrakhan at the Leadership Summit and so forth and so on. But I believe in sitting down and having dialogue with people, and that's what I've attempted to do.
So did he answer your qualms about Farrakhan
No,
in this dialogue?
No. We still disagree on this.
We still have disagreements on it.
And I think that Farrakhan is an unacceptable racist. That there is no basis for believing that he will change. That there's or any likelihood of it. 2 weeks after that summit that Cornel participated in his national newspaper, The Call, there was a long diatribe about how the Jews, not individual Jews, but the whole Jewish people, are still responsible for the killing of Jesus of Nazareth, and to have that being revived, incidentally, by an Islamic figure, as though this were his central concern. What is he raising that for in 1994, except to re-stir up the same old mythology that has been used against the Jews to generate hatred? I think this guy is intolerable. But we disagree about this. But we don't disagree about one element of it. Cornel disagrees about how to handle Farrakhan and how to relate to him. He doesn't disagree with me about the importance of fighting anti-Semitism. And so there's a strong difference on the tactic of how to deal with Farrakhan, but not on the principle that anti-Semitism is unacceptable.
Is there anything else? Go ahead.
That's a very important point, because you see, the ideology of white supremacy, which sits at or near the core of this civilization, has been based on the demonization of black people, the degradation of black bodies. And there's been a demonization of Minister Louis Farrakhan. It seems to me one never wants to lose sight of the humanity of anybody, including Minister Louis Farrakhan. Again, Michael Lerner would agree with me.
Well,
he doesn't want to demonize, he wants to bring moral critique to bear.
Do you agree that there's been a demonization of Louis Farrakhan?
I agree that every human being is created in the image of God. However, I also think that this guy is doing some terrible racist stuff. And look, we in the Jewish world, many of us protested against Kahana also when he was doing his racism against Mayor Kahana, when he was doing Jewish protests against Palestinians in a racist way. Many of us were out there against them. But here we have a disagreement. It's a strong disagreement. And one of the parts of our dialogue is to show that you can have these kinds of disagreements and still rebuild an alliance. You don't have to agree on everything in order to be able to understand that there's some fundamentals
disagreement for a second. What else did they disagree? You want to say something about Farrakhan?
I think what my brother Lerner and I would agree on, we're trying to hold on to principles as opposed to highlight personalities. We'll bring critique to bear on statements made by personalities, but we also want to keep the focus on the suffering and the social misery. And these are issues much bigger than any one of us, much bigger than Minister Louis Farrakhan, because that suffering was here before we arrived. It will be here after we make our exit. The question becomes, how do we accent the best of our communities, prophetic, progressive elements in those communities, even as we bring serious, consistent moral critique to bear?
And understand you want to address Let the Healing Begin as the subtitle of this book, Jews and Blacks. But nevertheless, do you believe that the relationship is growing more in conflict, is getting worse than getting better? Today, as we speak in 1995, April of 1995?
I think much depends on what we do. Right now, we're seeing, and we're calling for a variety of different summits, conferences, and so forth. We're going to have a major conference in September in regard to black-Jewish relations, but we're seeing a tremendous hunger and thirst in both communities. It depends on what we do. At the same time, of course, the tensions and frictions are getting deeper. Why? Because they're getting deeper in American society as a whole. They're getting deeper between blacks and whites. They're getting deeper between blacks and browns. This is part of a larger societal question and problem, but it depends so much on what we do, whether, in fact, people of goodwill have enough courage, willingness to sacrifice to bring people together. That's the real challenge.
Sacrifice what?
Sacrifice, meaning cutting against the grain within our respective communities and trying to hold on to the higher moral ground, even as we keep track of the powers that be.
Let me be very concrete here about why there are some very good grounds for optimism, too. You know, in the last election, 94, when a lot of people in this country were moving to the right, the Jews in this country voted 78% for the Democrats and liberal candidates. So we were the only group that had a higher percentage were blacks. Now, arguably, in the black world, there was some economic interest in that. But from the standpoint of the Jewish world, many Jews were voting against their economic interests if their economic interests are defined in terms of, say, lowering their tax burden vis-a-vis taking care of poor people. So there remains in the Jewish world a very strong commitment to social justice that has been going on, that's rooted in our Torah, that's rooted in the Bible, that is embedded in Jewish history and Jewish tradition. Now, there is another part amongst Jews, part not just of, yes, there are conservatives amongst Jews, but there are also in every one of us a struggle. And this is a struggle that's going on in every American, between the part of us that thinks we can go for our highest ideals and stay true to them, and the part of us that thinks, nobody's going to go for idealism. This is a period of selfishness, and you'd better go for your selfishness, your narrow material self-interest. This struggle is raging on inside everybody right at this moment. And the more that the country moves to the right, the more that everybody in the society is thinking to themselves, well, wait, if this is not a period of idealism, if it's not a period of caring, I'd better take care of myself. So so it's up for grabs now in the Jewish world as in the larger society, which way we're going to go.
I'm running out of time here. My thanks to Michael Lerner and Cornel West. Jews and Blacks, Let the Healing Begin. This is what Senator Bill Bradley says about this book. Michael Lerner and Cornel West, two of America's most significant thinkers with honesty and mutual respect, trade experiences and ideas that challenge our preconceptions and lead us towards common ground. Senator Bradley, by the way, will be here tomorrow night. We'll be right back. Clay Felker's here, and we'll talk about New York Magazine, the life of a great editor, and now a college professor at the University of California at Berkeley when we return.